When most Americans hear the word giant, they immediately think of fantasy creatures from movies, towering monsters from folklore, or exaggerated figures from fairy tales. Yet the word appears quietly in one of the oldest sections of the Bible, embedded in the book of Genesis in a way that feels almost understated. Genesis 6:24 states that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, described as mighty men of old, men of renown. That brief sentence has fueled centuries of debate. Who were they? Why are they mentioned so casually? And why does the Book of Enoch expand that short reference into something far more dramatic? Enoch describes the Nephilim as the offspring of the Watchers and human women, portraying them as powerful beings whose presence altered early civilization. But before jumping to literal interpretations, it is important to understand how ancient writers used language. In the ancient world, size often symbolized influence. Height could represent dominance. Greatness was not always about physical measurement. Imagine a pre-flood landscape filled with scattered settlements, slowly organizing into early communities. Suddenly, a group emerges with superior knowledge, stronger weaponry, and structured authority to surrounding tribes. Such figures might appear larger than life. Over time, that perception becomes legend. The Book of Enoch frames the Nephilim as destabilizing forces. It describes them consuming vast resources, expanding influence rapidly, and contributing to moral and social imbalance. Whether literal giants or metaphorical representations of concentrated power, the narrative suggests that something amplified authority beyond equilibrium. Ancient cultures across the world preserve similar traditions. Mesopotamian epics describe Semidavan heroes of extraordinary size. Greek mythology recounts the Titans. Norse legends speak of primordial giants shaping the world. These parallels do not prove literal beings of enormous height, but they reveal a recurring human instinct to preserve memory through magnified imagery. The persistence of giant narratives suggests that early societies encountered forms of dominance that felt overwhelming. Mythic scale became a storytelling tool to express impact beyond ordinary explanation. The Book of Enoch connects the Nephilim directly to accelerated knowledge introduced by the Watchers. Once metallurgy, structured astronomy, and advanced craftsmanship entered human society, power naturally concentrated in those who mastered these skills. Picture early communities where iron blades replaced stone tools. Leaders who controlled metal production gained immediate strategic advantage. Authority no longer depended solely on physical strength or lineage. It became tied to technological superiority. That shift alone could transform the social hierarchy within a single generation. The manuscript portrays the Nephilim as mighty men of renown, a phrase that may reflect not just physical size, but political and military influence. In ancient storytelling, reputation grows over time. Victories become legendary. Leaders become larger in memory than they were in life. Archaeology confirms that certain ancient populations were taller than neighboring groups due to genetic variation and nutrition differences. However, there is no scientific evidence of mythological giants dozens of feet tall roaming the earth. This distinction is important for responsible investigation. Rather than focusing on extreme imagery, it may be more useful to ask why early societies framed dominant figures in amplified physical terms. When a leader's presence shapes law, economy, warfare, and religion, the metaphor of size communicates impact more effectively than numbers. The Book of Enoch ultimately links the rise of the Nephilim to societal imbalance. Violence increases. Resources become strained. Moral structures weaken. The flood narrative that follows in Genesis may symbolize correction, a reset after concentrated power destabilized fragile systems. For modern audiences, the giants become less about fantasy and more about a recurring human pattern. When strength and knowledge concentrate without restraint, imbalance follows. That pattern remains relevant far beyond ancient mythology. One of the most interesting aspects of the Nephilim narrative is how it intersects with anthropology and early state formation. Around the time many ancient flood traditions emerged, archaeological evidence shows increasing social stratification across multiple civilizations. Hierarchies became more rigid. Monumental architecture began to appear. Power centralized. Imagine standing in a fertile valley thousands of years ago, watching the first large stone structures rise against the horizon. Massive blocks transported with coordination and engineering knowledge. Organized labor replacing scattered tribal independence. Those who commanded these projects would have appeared extraordinary to surrounding populations. The term men of renown may reflect precisely that shift. Renown spreads through storytelling. Victories become exaggerated. Achievements become magnified. Over generations, memory stretches details into mythic proportions. A leader remembered as dominant becomes remembered as towering. The ancient world did not separate history from symbolism the way modern societies attempt to. Narrative conveyed meaning. The Nephilim could represent a transitional period where human civilization crossed a threshold from survival-based communities into structured power systems. The Book of Enoch emphasizes not merely size, but appetite and expansion. It describes beings who consumed resources and altered the balance of creation. Interpreted symbolically, this language mirrors how centralized power can overwhelm fragile ecosystems and social structures. Even today, societies grapple with similar dynamics. When influence concentrates in small groups controlling advanced systems, the perception of imbalance grows. The ancient authors may have encoded this experience in the language available to them. Rather than asking whether skeletons of giants lie hidden underground, a more responsible question might be, what historical transition felt so disruptive that it required mythic framing? That question opens deeper investigation without abandoning intellectual integrity. Flood narratives appear in Mesopotamian, Hebrew, Greek, Hindu, and even Native American traditions. This cross-cultural pattern suggests that ancient communities preserved collective memory of catastrophic events, likely large-scale regional floods at the end of the last ice age. Within the Hebrew tradition, the rise of the Nephilim precedes the flood. The structure of the story creates a cause and effect sequence: accelerated power, widespread corruption, systemic imbalance, then reset. The Book of Enoch amplifies this framework by adding cosmic context. It portrays the Watcher's descent and the rise of the Nephilim as part of a broader narrative about order and disorder. Whether interpreted literally or symbolically, the sequence reflects a worldview deeply concerned with balance. For American viewers today, the flood story often feels distant, like a relic of Sunday school illustrations. But ancient audiences experienced these narratives as existential explanations. Why did catastrophe strike? Why did civilizations collapse? Mythic storytelling offered coherence during uncertainty. The giants, then, become part of a larger structure. They are not isolated curiosities, but narrative markers indicating excess. When strength grows without restraint, when dominance overshadows community stability, imbalance escalates. Modern research into climate shifts, sea level rise, and ancient disaster layers provides natural explanations for regional floods that could inspire global myths. A catastrophic event witnessed by multiple cultures would naturally generate layered storytelling. The enduring power of the Nephilim narrative lies not in proving supernatural giants, but in preserving memory of imbalance followed by reset. That structural pattern appears repeatedly in human history. Another reason the Nephilim story continues to attract attention is its psychological depth. Ancient authors were not merely recording events. They were interpreting the human condition through narrative. The giants represent more than physical scale. They embody excess. In many civilizations, rapid growth and dominance eventually produced instability. When agricultural societies expanded into city-states, and city-states into early empires, inequality intensified, power consolidated, warfare became organized, expansion demanded resources. Imagine watching your once small community become overshadowed by a ruling class capable of building monumental structures and commanding large armies. To ordinary people, those leaders might appear almost beyond humanity. Storytelling would naturally amplify that perception. The Book of Enoch describes the Nephilim as consuming vast amounts of resources and spreading violence. Whether literal or metaphorical, that imagery communicates imbalance. When appetite exceeds sustainability, collapse follows. History offers repeated examples. Civilizations that expanded rapidly, without ethical and structural stability, often faced dramatic correction. Environmental strain, internal conflict, or external invasion reset the system. The flood narrative that follows in Genesis and Enoch may represent such a reset in symbolic form. Rather than focusing solely on supernatural explanation, it can be viewed as a theological framing of catastrophic disruption that reshaped early societies. The persistence of giant traditions across cultures suggests that early humanity experienced periods where power disparity felt overwhelming. Mythic imagery became a way to preserve those lessons across generations. In this light, the Nephilim narrative transforms from fantasy into reflection. It asks what happens when strength, knowledge, and ambition accelerate faster than wisdom and restraint. As we conclude this investigation, the central question remains open. Were the giants before the flood literal beings described in ancient texts? Or were they symbolic representations of amplified power during a critical turning point in early civilization? The responsible answer is that the evidence does not support mythological creatures towering dozens of feet above humanity. However, the persistence of the narrative across cultures indicates that something profound shaped collective memory. The Book of Enoch frames the Nephilim within a broader moral arc. Accelerated knowledge leads to concentrated power. Concentrated power leads to imbalance. Imbalance invites correction. That structure feels less like fantasy and more like a recurring historical pattern for modern American audiences. The relevance lies not in searching for buried skeletons or sensational proof, but in understanding how ancient societies processed transformation and dominance. The giants serve as narrative symbols of disproportionate influence. They remind readers that when capability expands without corresponding ethical development, societies become fragile. Every generation faces its own version of this challenge. Technological breakthroughs reshape economies. Political systems struggle to adapt. Cultural shifts accelerate faster than institutions can respond. The Nephilim story survives because it captures that tension in unforgettable imagery. It does not demand blind belief. It invites reflection. Perhaps the enduring power of the giants before the flood is not about their height, but about the height of human ambition and the consequences that follow when balance is lost.